We're back for the next part of the ultimate guide to using Nina, the free and open source astrophotography software that lets you control all of your rig in a super powerful manner. And for the first time in forever, we have clear skies, although quite like a 3/4 moon, but still clear skies that we can use to do the initial setup of stuff and testing of stuff like autofocus, like what is going to be my step size, what is going to be the setting that I have for backlash, etc. And also things like Platesolving, make sure that it works. Meridian Flip is something we could check as well. And then also things like setting up the guiding from Nina and PhD2 together before we can actually get started with an advanced sequence that will run throughout the night. So I am currently in Nina. I'm on the equipment tab, which is where we normally start our journey when we're in Nina, and I have all of my equipment connected using this connect button here that lets me connect everything at once. And in part one, we set up all of the equipment, and so now all of the equipment was connected without any issues. And my next step will be to go to the imaging tab, because this is where I can control my camera. And I've also set up my tabs so that I can look at my filter wheel, flat panel, focuser, etc. So I have a flat panel that closes in front of the scope and acts as a dust cap. And it's currently open, so I can actually see the star. And I have the telescope in its initial position pointed at the North Celestial Pole, more or less. And if you are able to see stars at the North Celestial Pole, you don't have any obstacles. You can use it as I do now, unless it's very low, like you're in Singapore or something like that. That's not going to work. Otherwise, you'll want to maybe first, go to something like manual focus targets. And if you don't have it available, you just need to go to the top right here and click on this star icon, and it should appear somewhere on your UI. Then you can put it in the right place. And then you can choose whatever star is high enough. Like for me, it would be Al-Qaid, and then slew to that star. And then you can, basically the goal is to get to an area where you can actually, take images of the stars, because now we want to actually get our autofocus parameters decided and settled on. So here I am just towards the North Celestial Pole, and I make sure that I have a filter that lets in a lot of light. So for me, it's going to be the luminance filter, and I can take an exposure. I like to have 5 seconds just to make sure that I'll see stars, even if they're very much out of focus. So here, if I take a 5-second exposure, you can see that the stars are indeed out of focus, but they're not too far out of focus. They could be, depending on your situation, extremely far out of focus, in which case they would look typically like very large, very dim, either like discs or donuts, depending on whether your telescope has a central obstruction. In this case, you may even want to go to 15 seconds, 30 seconds exposures until you can see stars even as huge discs or donuts. And then your goal is to find the direction of focuser travel that will make those discs or those donuts smaller, so that we can get as small as possible until we actually pinpoint in focus and the stars are point rather than either discs or donuts. For me, because I do have a central obstruction, you can see that it's more or less like a little donut with a dot inside. And so I have already my focuser control here. By default, it's actually on this window. Normally, you have 2 tabs in there. You have the camera and the focuser. You don't have weather. But I decided, to move things around, and I had because I like using both of the tabs, so I put the focuser over weather there, and I never use the weather, so I have the ability to use it here. So it's super powerful customization of the controls that you have in there. So we have the focuser at a specific position that is kept track of by the ASCOM driver of the focuser, and it's just Nina reports on it, and you can ask Nina to move to a specific target position. Like we're at position number 5000, we could tell Nina to go to 5050 and then click on move and see what happens. Another way that we can make the focuser move using that is to use the arrow buttons at the bottom here. And by the way, if you do not see this tab, you just need to click on this little plus icon, like, I don't know, plus with like a framing type of icon kind of thing, and that should make it appear somewhere on your UI. Then you can move it around as I just did. And yeah, so I was talking about those arrows. The single arrows will move the focuser by a little bit, and the double arrows will move it by a lot. Specifically, the double arrows will move it by 5 times your autofocus step size, and the small arrows will move it by half the autofocus step size. So there's like a ratio of 10:1 between those two movements. What is your autofocus step size? By default, I believe it's 40 or 50. And this is what we have here under autofocus, and you can see it's indeed set at the default of 50. So it means that with the single arrow, I'll be moving my focuser by 25 steps. Otherwise, with the large arrow, I'll be moving it by 500 steps. By 250 steps, sorry. So that's how it works. By the way, if you don't like the way that those arrows were implemented, it's my fault. I added them to Nina years and years ago using those definitions of half and 5 times. Sorry. Maybe what we can do is try to move in one direction with the large movement and see what happens. So I'm going to choose to move to the right and just do that, just to see the impact on stars. Because the step size, like those, what is one step? How much does it move the focuser tube? What is the impact on the stars? I have no idea at this stage. I'm blind, I'm flying blind. So I just moved it to the right there, and you can see that the position that used to be 5,000 is now 5,250. So I'm going to take, let's say, 3-second exposure and see how the stars are looking like. I'm even going to zoom in so I can see the change. Okay, so we can see that by going 250 steps to the right, it made a huge change on my stars. Okay, so we want to go back to the left. And also because the change is actually really big there, I feel like I will likely need to reduce the autofocus step size because this is big. Let's see. Let's take another 3-second exposure. We should be roughly, minus the backlash, back to where we started, and we know that we likely need to move the focus still more to the left until we get nice in-focus stars. Although, if your autofocus step size is far too large for the actual movement of your telescope, we might have like skipped across the point of best focus and be on the other side already. We'll see. If by using the left arrow I get more and more out of focus, it means that the best point of focus is between 5,000 and 5,250. We're doing all of that not to do manual focusing, just to figure out what are the right parameters for autofocus. So let's move to the left with just 25 steps and see what the result is. Okay, so we're getting more and more out of focus, so which means that actually my point of best focus is between 5,000 and 5,250. We went right past the point of best focus. It does tell me that my step size is likely too large. And we saw a large difference between almost in focus stars and now very much donuts with just 25 steps. So that means that the autofocus step size is probably needs to be less than 25 focuser steps. It needs even to be much less, because ideally, if I move the focuser by the number of steps that is defined in the autofocus steps, so for me it's 50 right now, I should see like a small but noticeable change in the star size. That's my criteria. It's kind of a rule of thumb. So I'm going to try something else. I'm going to say, okay, go back to the autofocus step size, which is measured in focuser steps, and say we want to move by, let's say, 20 each time. 20. And then I go back to my imaging tab and I use the small arrow, which will move 10 steps to the left, and I'll just look at the impact on that star. Okay, we moved only 10 steps. I'm going to take an exposure, and we have a small but noticeable change in the star shape with just 10 steps. So that means I think we found our ideal autofocus step size. It is 10 focuser steps. So we can go ahead, go to options and set 10. Now I'm using a very, very cheap focuser called the Gemini, and a single focuser step actually is a large amount of movement. For most focusers like the ZW EAF or the QHYQ focuser or the Toptech AAF or others as well, typically your autofocus step size, I would expect it to be around 25 to 50. Sometimes even more, like 100 is not unheard of. So 10 is actually a very small value. I expect yours will be larger. But you're looking for a number of steps where you as a human, you can see the star getting a bit larger to a noticeable degree. That's the important bit. So, okay, now we have probably a good step size for our autofocus routine. So I'll just go manually to a better point of focus. We already determined it's like in between 5,000 and 5,250. So I'll just put, yeah, like 5,080. You know what? I'm gonna guess it's 5,080. Let's see, and click on move. And once we are at 5,080, I'm gonna take another exposure, and we are close. We're not quite in focus, but we're definitely close to best focus. The stars are no longer donuts. They're still a bit fat, a bit too fat for my taste, which means we're not quite in focus, but we're close. So now we could run an autofocus to make sure that everything works. But there's one more thing. We haven't set the focuser backlash. The focuser backlash is basically when you change direction. So let's say I move to the right by a large amount, and then I move to the left by a small amount. Maybe when I move to the left, I don't see any change for a couple of times, and then I start seeing change. That's because gears have backlash. So if I take this guy here, like when I change direction, there's a moment where the other gear does not move simply because they're not perfectly meshed together. And that's what's happening in your focuser. It's happening also sometimes at the level of the telescope focuser itself, the tube moving in and out, for instance. So you're looking at the combined telescope plus electronic focuser backlash. And if you don't correct for backlash, your autofocus will not be precise. And I have kind of a magic formula that works for pretty much every telescope and focuser combination that I've tested. And I've tested Schmidt-Cassegrains, Newtonians, and refractors, never Ritchie-Chrétiens. So maybe it's not good for that, but I take the autofocus step size, I multiply it by 10, and I put it in one of those backlash in/out settings, only one of those. And you may need to make sure that the backlash compensation method here is overshoot. And if it's not overshoot, if it's absolute, you want to go to your equipment tab, disconnect the focuser. I'm not actually going to do it. Go back to your options and then move it to absolute before reconnecting the focuser. But if you're in overshoot, just in one of the directions, take your autofocus step size, multiply by 10, put that value in there, and we may need to change that a bit later on, but for now it's fine. Basically, the goal is to have a value in here that is larger than your actual physical focuser backlash. And I find that 10 times the autofocus step size is a good compromise between like a too large a value and too small a value. It works pretty much every time I've used it. Something like the ZWEF, for instance, you have a backlash setting, but that's only used when you manually move the focuser. The ZWEF autofocus module, our routine, has a huge backlash compensation built in, which can cause issues if you have focusers with limited travel. Okay, so now we have set those things up. And just remember that when we set up Nina, I mentioned that the curve fitting strategy that I prefer personally, as kind of the one who built those fitting strategies, trends and parabolic. To me, It works really, really well. And you have tons of other parameters. I would always recommend leaving the autofocus initial offset steps to default. The autofocus method star HFR, curve fitting strategy, again, trends and parabolic works for me. Number of attempts, one works fine for me. I mean, if it fails once, it's usually not going to succeed the second time, but you can increase that. And there's also, like, if you want to use only the bright stars, because maybe you're on a target where there's a lot of faint stars and you feel like the faint stars are betraying the autofocus and making it focus poorly, you can use that. Say, like, just use the 5 top brightest stars. Otherwise, you just set that to 0 to say no. And you also have 2 parameters that kind of should be next to one another, but they're no longer next to one another. The outer crop ratio and the inner crop ratio. This is, if you want, like by default, the Nina autofocus will look at this frame and look at all of the stars and do focus. It's possible to tell Nina, look only at the stars at the center of the field. Or it's possible to tell Nina to look only at the stars within a sort of rectangular donut within the field. So if you want to do that, you would go to this autofocus and you would say, for example, inner crop ratio is like 0.5. So it's a value between 0 and 1. And outer crop ratio could be 0.8, let's say, something like that. Then I'm going to go to imaging options, and I'm going to select annotate image so that we see how the focus would work. And I'm going to take an exposure. And here we can see that the stars that have been highlighted there are the stars that Nina would use for autofocus. And you can see they're all in this kind of donut that is between inner crop and outer crop. Like, this can be useful if you want extremely precise focuser, and I'm told that it is very useful for Takahashi telescopes. And initially, I'm the one who implemented this feature as well. If you go back to your autofocus options, and if I set my outer crop ratio to 1, the maximum, and the inner crop ratio to 0.5, now it's no longer a donut. We're just going to look at the frame, something like that. So we're just going to look at the stars at the very center of the frame. One also way to use this outer crop, inner crop ratio is that if you're imaging a globular cluster because of the high concentration of stars at the center of them, they can make the autofocus algorithm kind of panic. In which case, defining a donut outside of the main globular cluster can be a very good idea to make sure the autofocus works well. So I'm going to go back to the default settings of 1 and 1 because we're not going to use this right now. I could set a binning. I like to set that to 1. The R-square threshold is basically kind of a curve fitting threshold to determine whether your autofocus was successful. I think that 0.7 works well most of the time. Default autofocus exposure time is going to be 4 seconds, and you can override it per filter there. You can see in parentheses you have the default autofocus time, and then for S, H, and O filters, I have manually overwritten that to be 8 seconds. You can choose whether you want to disable guiding during autofocus. If you're using an off-axis guider, typically you do want to disable guiding during autofocus, and I do use an off-axis guider, so I'm going to set that to on. And then if you have a focuser that somehow, it needs to settle down before you can take another exposure, you can put a settle time in here. But for most focusers, 0 seconds should be fine. You could also, if you wanted to, for each autofocus point that we're taking, normally we can take 1 exposure, measure the stars, move the focuser, take 1 exposure, measure the stars, move the focuser, etc., until we get a nice curve that tells us where the minimum, the point of best focus is. But if you want to have even better results, even more precise, you can spend more time, and instead of taking 1 exposure per focus point, you can get 2 or 3, and then Nina will average the star sizes, which can counteract the effects of wind. if you're imaging on a very windy night, it could be a good idea. So that you average out like the artifacts, the poor measurements that can be triggered by strong wind on the autofocus. And then we've already explained the other settings. So that's all of the autofocus settings. And now I can go back to my imaging tab. I'm going to take one exposure with the annotation should be back to basically all of the stars. And if you ever see that at this stage when you're close to focus, the stars are not getting detected properly, especially if you use the default autofocus time, which is 4 seconds, and the one that you've set up, you could go ahead and go to the imaging options. So let me go to the imaging options, and there we go. And you can see that you have some advanced settings in there with a stretch factor, bias clipping, star sensitivity, and noise reduction. So if you see that not enough stars are being chosen, just increase the star sensitivity. If you see that noise is being chosen, but not like sometimes what is obviously a hot pixel or noise is being chosen as a star, then you want to enable some noise reduction. And if it tends to focus on hot pixels, you want to choose median. Otherwise, you can try normal, high, highest. And the goal would be that can be very useful with uncooled camera sensors that have more thermal noise. So in that case, you medium is the most effective, but it takes a bit of time, especially if you have a slow CPU on your imaging PC. Otherwise, normal or high would work well. If by default you feel that your image is too bright, the stretch factor, decreasing the stretch factor by like 0.05, sorry, so putting it at 0.15 is instead of 0.2 can help. If, in contrast, your image seems too dark and you want the stretch to be more aggressive so that Nina can detect more stars for autofocus, you can increase that value. And if Nina picks up noise as stars and the noise reduction didn't seem to help, you could try to increase black clipping from like minus 2.8 to something like minus 2. So those are like small things that you can do, but I have not had to do that at all for a long time. I implemented this star sensitivity, this noise reduction, and it's a lot of effort went into that. I analyzed so many images from so many types of cameras, got volunteers to send me like subframes. I mean, it was insane amount of work, and you can really dial in your star detection very well. Just make sure that when you're doing that, you have annotate image on, and you can play with that one parameter at a time to see how well it affects your images. For me, this is perfectly fine. This is gonna work great. So I can open the autofocus tab. If you don't have it visible, for me it's here already, but you can click on this AF icon there, and it should become available in your imaging tab. And what I'll do, I'll make sure that autofocus will work, and I'll study the curve, see what happens. Let's do start autofocus. And I'm going to wait and show you how it looks once the curve is done. Okay, the autofocus is done, and we have a curve that is typical of an autofocus run that was started when the stars were a bit to the right of best focus. Maybe we started, here actually, and then we took exposures there, and then we went all the way back, and we found the minimum. This is the minimum with the parabolic fitting, that tells us it's here. The minimum with the trends, we can't see it here, but it would be around there. And then the compromise between the two is actually the point of best focus. It's this red dot there, and it's perfect. That's why I love parabolic plus trends. It's kind of an autocorrection algorithm between the fitting and the curve, the trend fitting. And it works even when you have a curve that is lopsided like that. If I were to rerun the autofocus right now, we would get my typical autofocus run mid-session, mid-sequence, and let's take it and look at how it would look like, because that's like what we would get in real life most of the time. Here we go. This is what we get. It's not too lopsided. It's okay. We get perfectly the point of best focus. And seeing things seem to be fine. I could probably have the step size a bit larger because we stay like between 5 HFR and around 3, right? 3 to 5, it's a bit of a small range to be playing with, especially since we saw that we could go a bit further. So I think I'll go to my, my autofocus options and set that to 15. But it should be fine with 10. Now there's multiple symptoms that you could see here. Let's say that you have a step size that is too small. I'm going to show you how it looks like. So I'll put like an autofocus step size of, let's say, 2 or 3 and show you how that looks like after we do an autofocus run. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff we'd be getting. Basically, it's like there's no curve. It didn't work, and actually it noticed it, and it canceled the autofocus. So we had only a slight glance at it. But when you get like points that are all like kind of all over the place, it's more than likely that you simply don't have a large enough autofocus step size. What about too large of an autofocus step size? Let's say 30, to see exactly how that would look like. I'll go to imaging, I'll start autofocus, and we're going to look at the image as the autofocus routine is running as well. So immediately you can see that we went very, very far out of focus, but Nina is doing a really good job at detecting those stars. And now with each focus step, we are moving, like changing the star size quite a lot in between focus steps. But I'm actually really impressed by star detection. Oh, 666, sorry about that. It's working actually much better than I expected with such a large step size. And this is the curve that we get. It's actually beautiful, but you can see the last point there. There was a lot of uncertainty. The red bar is a measure of uncertainty. I also added that to Nina. So overall, it worked really, really well. I'm kind of impressed. Yeah, we're going from like 3 to 12 in terms of measurement of the star size. That's too much of a spread. So I think 15 autofocus step size is going to work well. So let me do a focus with the 15 step size just so that we see how it looks like. And here we go. That actually looks like the best compromise. We're going between 3.4, let's say, and 7, 7.5. That's excellent. That's exactly what I need. This is our step size. We're good. And there's one more symptom that I want to show you because it's also important to recognize. So I'm going to go to the options and remove my backlash compensation and run an autofocus to show you how it looks like without the backlash compensation or with not enough backlash compensation. Okay, we have a really weird shape there once it's done. It still managed to find the right focus point, but if we go to the final image, which is this, the stars don't look perfectly in focus. This is because when Nina basically moved the focuser to the best point of focus, it actually reversed direction. And so the focus point is off by the amount of backlash in your focuser. And the symptom of that is a curve that is kind of flat at first before finally getting an angle that makes sense. So if you look at this, the left-hand side of the curve is not affected by backlash at all, but the right-hand side of the curve, and that would always be the right-hand side, is affected by backlash. If I look at the slope of the curve there, you can see it's something like this, and the slope of the curve on the right is good up to this point. After that point, it flattens. And effectively, the amount here of steps that were taken, which are 1, 2 autofocus steps, meaning 30 focuser steps, is the native backlash of your focuser. So I know that my focuser system has a backlash of roughly 30 steps measured in focuser steps. So if I wanted to, I could go and say backlash in out like 50. That would work. And yeah, let's try it out actually. Let's go to image. It doesn't really matter. I could keep it at 100. It would work fine. I shouldn't, like, don't try to fine-tune backlash. If it's working, not a problem. If, however, after setting backlash to be 10 times that of the autofocus step size, and you still see like a flat part there, then you need to increase that backlash number that you had by the number of focuser steps that you see during which the curve is still flat. Let's see if I'm right and that the backlash is indeed less than 50 focuser steps. So I'm going to click Start Autofocus and let's see the result. And here we go. We have a beautiful focus curve with a beautiful point of best focus. It's magnificent. This is exactly what I need. I didn't really need to really fine-tune the overshoot backlash there. The initial value was perfectly fine, but now we're like super optimized because why not? So here we are. And by the way, one more tip. If Nina wasn't able to find stars in there. Actually two more tips. One, when you enable annotate on Nina, the image will be black and white, even for color sensors. So after you're done, you can go back to imaging there and turn off the annotate image. And then the image will be back in color if you're using one-shot color. But also if Nina doesn't detect enough stars and the other settings that we looked at don't do anything, just increase the exposure time for your particular filter. So I could actually go for the hydrogen alpha filter and then do an autofocus to make sure that under my autofocus options, the 8 seconds exposure time that I have set up for the autofocus will be enough to do the autofocus successfully. And let's try it. Start the autofocus. And one thing when you do that is I like using the celestial pole, or I like using a star field at around 30 degrees altitude, because that's kind of the worst case scenario for autofocus and the autofocus exposure length. My own latitude means that when I'm towards the celestial North Pole at 35 degrees, so it's perfect for me in terms of a star field to analyze. But when you're really looking to find out what is your optimal autofocus kind of exposure length, it's good to look at the worst case scenario and maybe find a target, maybe around go back to the manual focus targets and find a target that's around 30, 34 degrees. Slew to it, and then attempt autofocus with one of your broadband filters, one of your narrowband filters with the respective exposure length, and then see whether it works. Bonus points if you do it on a smoky/smoggy day, because that's also a big problem in terms of autofocus exposure time. And your goal would be to find the lowest autofocus exposure time that still gives you a perfect curve, because then you optimize the amount of time that you spend autofocusing in your sequence. Honestly, I don't think it's worth optimizing that much, and I won't try to do it, but that is something you can do if you want to really optimize and spend as little time autofocusing as possible in your sequence. So here we are, the 8 seconds seem to be working quite well for hydrogen alpha. I have a good and autofocus position. Perfect, no issues whatsoever, so I'm just going to keep that. Okay, so we are pretty much done with autofocus. In the next part, I'll be looking at various Nina plugins that could make things even better, if you wish. So I've already mentioned a bit Hocus Focus. I will not focus on the Hocus Focus next time because it's a hugely complex plugin. I've already shown you in a previous part how to enable it if you have trouble with the vanilla Nina autofocus. But one of the plugins that I'll use in the next part of this ultimate guide is going to be the filter offset calculator. So yeah, look forward to that. Otherwise, let's go back to our imaging tab. And once you're done with autofocus and you have your image properly in focus, I'm going to go back to the luminance filter. We should be still more or less in focus. Let me take an exposure. We're going to go for plate solving. We're going to make sure that plate solving works. You can see that my stars are in focus. They should be detectable by Nina and by the plate solving algorithm. So to make sure that plate solving works, I'm just going to slew to a manual focus target. and I'm going to click on slew to target. That should move the mount, assuming you've already unparked your mount. So make sure that under equipment mount there, you've clicked on unparked mount there before doing the slew. For some mounts like on step, you even want to turn on the tracking before you can slew, but otherwise, it should be working without any issues. And now we've slewed to target. So let me take an image to see roughly where we are in the sky. And you can see that I don't see a super bright star. Maybe it's this, I don't know, but we're not on target. We're not on target, so what do we do? Well, when you were dealing with the autofocus, you were likely not on target either if you had to slew to another part of the sky as I suggested, which is fine, as long as you could see a star field. So let's go to the Platesolving tab. And before that, let's double check our Platesolving settings. We're using ASTAP. The ASTAP directory is set up. So in theory, it should all work. So let's go to Platesolving. And here we have multiple settings. We have the sync setting and the reslew to target setting. By the way, if you don't see this tab, you need to go to this little icon there, click it, and it should appear. Sync basically means that Nina will take an exposure where it's located. It will run the Platesolving, and once the Platesolving has identified exactly where we are pointing, sync means we're going to tell the mount like, hey, this is actually where you're pointing. And the mount will take that and say, okay, I will update my pointing model and I know now exactly where I am pointing. This is what sync says here. So we want to turn that on because we want to tell the mount what's going on. And reslew to target, as its name would imply, is that based now on what we've seen, we can slew the mount to the correct location. And the way that it works is actually the mount does most of the work, most of the time actually. Some mounts are not so smart, but the mount will sync, so it updates inside itself where it thinks it's pointed, and then we just issue with reslew to target, we issue again a go-to command to the mount. And the mount, now that it knows where it's pointed, by getting that second go-to command to the same coordinates, it knows to move closer to those coordinates, and then we repeat until we are within a certain error amount in arc minutes. The default is 1 arc minute, and it works for most equipment. And even if your mount doesn't support the sync command, which some don't, Nina is super well built. The creator of Nina actually added that later on. Instead of relying on the mount go-to, Nina can actually compute the amount for each axis to move by to actually center the target based on the Platesolving result. Some amazing stuff, like incredible stuff in Nina. Anyway, the next one is your exposure time. So I'm going to set the same as autofocus for now, 4 seconds. And you do have under your Platesolving here an exposure time. So I'm also going to set it to 4 seconds in those settings as well. And you can choose your filter, the binning. I keep everything the same, and once you're ready, you click play, and we'll see what happens. So we're going to take a 4-second exposure. It's going to be looking exactly like that, and immediately, like you didn't even see it happen, ASTAP ran like in a fraction of a second. So yeah, and we saw that we were 42 arc minutes away, so a bit more than a half a degree away from the star. Now we are taking a second exposure after go-to again, and bam! There we see the star is very close to center, and actually it's 24 arc seconds away from center. So we are within the error of 1 arc minute. And so Platesolving is working perfectly for us. And if it doesn't work, you really want to go, like the only thing I can think of is that the star detection didn't work. So maybe increase the exposure time. And another thing could be go back to your options, equipment, and make sure you have your focal length and pixel size and yeah, focal length and pixel size correct, because otherwise, yeah, Platesolving can have issues. Okay, so here we are. We've done Platesolving. Platesolving, it's usually a very easy check. We just check that Platesolving works, and then we're done with it, and we're fine. Okay, now we have both autofocus, plate solving working. What is the next step that's usually causing us trouble? The Meridian Flip. And the Meridian Flip depends on several things. It depends on your mount settings and it depends on Nina settings, and both need to be compatible with one another. Let me show you my mount settings briefly. So I'm going to disconnect the mount and click on the setting gear, and you can see I get the ASCOM driver. And what's important for me is that I have limits. For me, it's Meridian West. I'm basically telling the mount with this 5 degrees that the mount is free to move 5 degrees west past the meridian when it's imaging, because the sidereal rate is what, 0.25 degrees per minute, something like that. 5 degrees is actually 20 minutes past the meridian, right? So I'm telling the mount, please go ahead, you can keep slewing for 20 minutes past the meridian. Now there's also a problem with the on-step mounts, is that these limits are actually a meridian window, and you need to be absolutely sure that in your hand controller for on-step mounts, you have set the preferred side of pier to east. And then that will work without issues. If you're using the AM5, AM5N, you don't have this problem at all. Just set your meridian limit, how many degrees or minutes you can go past the meridian. And if you're using also Green Swamp server, that's fine. EQ mod as well. Just set your limits properly to tell your mounts that you can slew a little bit past the meridian if you want to be able to image through the meridian. So that's kind of like the settings. And then I can go and look at my options. And under imaging, I have these settings that we already looked at. And if I have pause before meridian to 0, it means we will not pause. We will keep imaging through the meridian, and then between 5 and 10 minutes after the meridian will affect the flip. And you saw that my mount allows me to track past the meridian up to 20 minutes. So we're fine with these settings. Note that Nina and the mount might have a slight difference in their internal clock. So they might disagree as to exactly when a target has crossed the meridian. That can cause issues, so make sure to have a margin of at least like 3-4 minutes to account for the difference in the internal clocks of the mount and of Nina, which uses the imaging PC clock. That's very important to keep in mind. And that lets me image through the meridian. If you have a Celestron mount, just like on-step, they kind of try to be too smart for their own good. If you tell the mount to point at a target that is close to the meridian but hasn't crossed it, the mount will do the meridian flip immediately. So it means that even though the target has not crossed the meridian, the mount is like, oh hey, let's make sure we don't need to do a meridian flip during the session. I'm just going to go to it from the opposite side of the meridian so that now we're good for the rest of the night. Look at how smart I am. But Nina doesn't know that. So Nina will still ask the mount to do a meridian flip, and it's not going to work. And so Nina will say, oh, I give up, and we'll stop imaging. So to avoid that, you want to get the information from the mount about which side of pier it's using. And so we have this use telescope side of pier. It's default to on. Leave it on unless you see you have some issues, because some mounts have bugs and report the wrong side of pier. So yeah, it's a whole thing. I'm also the guy who added this setting in Nina. Sorry, I realize I've built a lot in Nina. And another setting that you want, and you absolutely want to keep it on, is recenter after flip. It just means that after the meridian flip, will recenter the target as you would expect. Okay, so another thing is that if you have trouble with that, let's say you've set it up like that, and the meridian flip does not work for you, then it is safest to pause a few minutes from meridian, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Maybe when you do your test, you can start with 10 minutes just to be safe. Pause 10 minutes before the meridian, and then keep the other settings the same. You could even say between 10 and 15 minutes past the meridian, do the flip. What this says is that 10 minutes before the meridian, it will stop the tracking of the telescope and stop the imaging. And then 10 minutes after the meridian, it will tell the mount to go to the target. And that gives us a very wide margin, even if like the mount and Nina disagree on exactly when the meridian was crossed by the target. With that, we're really sure to get rid of that issue, and go-to should work, and the meridian flip should work. You're just losing 20 minutes of the best imaging time that you could have. That's why I like to image through the meridian by setting pause before meridian to 0, and between 5 and 10 minutes. And because the pausing before meridian and then doing the flip later works for pretty much every mount, that's what the ASI Air does by default. And that's a safe way, but you lose the best imaging time, which is a bit of a shame. So I like to track past the meridian, and that's what we're doing here. Okay, so we set our meridian flip settings. How do we test those? Well, we can kind of do a little hack there. What I'll do is I'll go to my mount. I make sure that it's not parked, and I'll go to the flat wizard that we've used previously, and I'm going to tell it to slew to zenith, but from the west side, so before meridian crossing. So I'm going to click on slew to zenith, and my telescope will slew to point to the zenith, but in a way that if it were tracking, it would cross the meridian immediately. The slew is done. I'm actually checking on my live camera of my balcony just to see what's going on with my telescope. I'm not going completely blind into it. And now that I'm done, I can go to the equipment tab. I can go to mount here. And what I'll do is I will slew a little bit to the east, like something like this, slightly. That way we're going to cross the meridian if we're tracking after a few minutes. So if I go to my imaging tab there, you can see that the tracking is stopped. So if I go back to, and if you don't have this tab, you just want to click on the telescope icon there, you'll see this. I'll go back to my mount. I will select sidereal here for the tracking speed. Click on set tracking rate. Go back to my imaging tab. Look at this, and you can see that the meridian will be in 14 minutes. Perfect. So if I want to be even tighter, I could like now slew a little bit to the west until we have less time. But like 13 minutes is fine. I want to test that out. So now I'm done with that, I can go to my sequencer. And what I'll do is I will go to my templates. I will add my default sequence there. But I need to make sure that we do not slew and center to any target. I want to stay where I am. So slew and center is gone. I don't want to do any autofocus. We're already focused. I don't want to do any guiding. This is just for a meridian flip. So I delete all of that. I don't want to wait for time, wait for horizon, none of that stuff. I don't want to autofocus after filter change. I don't want to center after drift. But I want to make sure I still have the meridian flip trigger enabled. And I don't want to dither after any exposure, so that's gone. And my loop conditions, I want to just loop until dawn because it's just for a test. So you can see I'm going to instructions, searching for loop. I'm going to put loop until time. The time will be astronomical dawn. I'm going to remove the altitude requirement. And then you can see it's going to take SHO exposures of 300 seconds long each. That's fine with me. Maybe I'll just go for L. I'm not gonna bother with anything. And 60 seconds luminance exposures where we don't need to do one like 5-minute exposures. So now that we have a sequence there, I'm going to start it. And now it's switching to the luminance filter, and it should start. Yeah, it's starting to take exposures. I'm going to go back to my imaging tab. It's taking exposures, and now all I need to do is wait like 11 minutes plus in my options between 5 and 10 minutes, so roughly like 15, 16, 17 minutes. And then I should see a meridian flip, and I can see whether the meridian flip works properly. That's how I would test for the meridian flip. And actually, you'll notice that this does not depend on plate solving, autofocus, or even being able to see the stars at all. So if you keep the dust cap on, you can actually test that during the day. The center after flip will obviously not work during the day, but it will tell you whether the initiation of the meridian flip and the telescope actually moving to the opposite side of the meridian, whether it works. So that can be done during the day, so you don't need to waste imaging time. This technique is super cool to check. And of course, if it's during the day or even if it's at night, it's actually a great idea during the meridian flip when you first, testing it out, to be right next to the telescope so you can stop it. I have it on my smartphone. I'm looking at what's happening, and if something goes wrong, I will run to stop my telescope. I really should be next to it, but it's a bit exhausting to move up and down the stairs in my condition. So yeah, this hopefully will work. So what I'll do is I'll wait those additional 15 minutes or so, and then we'll look at the flip together, and hopefully it's going to work well. Okay, now we're about to cross the meridian. We're past the meridian, but we're not doing the flip yet because of our settings, right? Minutes after meridian, 5 minutes, and up to 10 minutes past the meridian. This is because it tells Nina whether it should stop imaging before that 5 minutes, or if the frame will complete in between the 5 and 10 minutes, so it can keep taking one more frame and then do the flip. It's a whole little thing there. But because we're taking 60-second exposures, I expect that between 5 and 6 minutes after meridian, the flip will actually be done by Nina. So we just need to wait another, 4 minutes, 20 seconds, roughly between 4 minutes 20 and 5 minutes 20 seconds to get to the flip. So I'll see you when we're there. Okay, we're almost 5 minutes past the meridian. In 20 seconds, we'll be 5 minutes past the meridian. We're in the middle of an exposure that ends at a bit more than 30 seconds. So I actually expect that at the end of this exposure, the meridian flip will occur. And that's basically our test of the meridian flip to make sure, that it works. So we'll see whether I'm right first, whether it really ends like it does the flip at the end of this exposure, and whether the flip will actually correctly trigger and work. And as a reminder, in the sequence, we do have the meridian flip in there. Okay, and I'm right. And there we go, we are flipping the scope, and actually, I can see it on my camera. The scope is actually flipping exactly as expected. So the flipping during the meridian flip is a simple go-to command, really. It really relies on the telescope knowing that the target has crossed the meridian, and that's why, for on-step mounts, the preferred side of pier is actually important, that we set it to east, and it's also important to have some margin in the case that the mount doesn't think that the meridian has been crossed yet. There's another thing, if you're using EQ mode, you really want to flip maybe 10 minutes after the meridian, because EQ mode has some issues with sensing the mount when you do the recenter after the flip. So there's a lot of stuff. So now the flip is done. We're settling the mount, and it will recenter the scope. In this case, because I'm using a sequence that does not have coordinates, it actually remembered where it was pointed before the flip, and it will just recenter to that after the flip. Otherwise, it would use your target coordinates to do the recentering. Okay, we're recentering and using the Platesolving for that. And you can see that it's actually working, right? Not inside tolerance. We are re-slewing to the target. I don't know whether select new guide star and resume auto guider will actually do anything, because we don't have anything about guiding in the sequence. Oh no, it's actually trying to guide. I'll let it be. It's starting the guiding, resuming the auto guider. It's probably going to be fine, in a moment. It's actually amazing that this is working. I don't get why it is working, but sometimes we just need to let it be. And now it's just settling for 30 seconds, and we'll keep imaging, keep doing the sequence. Everything's working perfectly fine. The meridian flip has been successful. Everything is awesome. And that is how I would, test the Meridian Flip. If you're testing during the day with the dust cap off, closed to make sure you're not exposing to the sun, just be ready to see any that the plate solving after the flip will just not work. Okay, I'm happy to see the guiding is not working well. That's exactly as expected because we need to recalibrate the guiding. I'm just going to stop it. And also to stop the sequence because we don't need to test this more. The Meridian Flip has been successful, and you could see that I was imaging through the Meridian, which is perfect because we are taking full advantage of the best time of the night for that particular target. Okay, we were talking about auto guiding. That's where I want to go next in terms of like equipment, guider. There's some good stuff in there, some options here that I want to consider and to discuss with you to see how we should be all setting them up with regards also to PhD2 as well. So let's get into it.